there's a lot of culinary skills to brush up on. It's not like cooking farm chicken.
No.
It's a long way from that, but the result on the table at the end of the day is just gorgeous. And something that goes past your head like a grenade launched out of a grenade launcher, that's a teal. It can get too windy. I have been out in 100-mile-an-hour winds trying to wildfowl, and you can't stand up, literally. And any birds they look for cover and stay there. So that it can get too windy for wildfowling, even though windy conditions, stormy conditions are the best.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Wild Food People podcast, brought to you this time live from a slightly windy, slightly wet, rocky shelf overlooking, are we calling this the Glaslyn?
This is the Glaslyn and the Dwyrid estuary. They both meet kind of between here and that big rock over there. So immediately in front of us we've got the Glaslyn, where that green buoy is. And the furthest bit of water over there, where I think I can spot some wildfowl and some gulls sitting on that sandbank, that's the Dwyrid. So it's where that's the confluence, and they both flow into the sea over there.
Yeah, and we are sat here sort of 3/4 of the way through September, so we're at the equinox and it's spring tides at the moment, so we are going towards another spectacularly low tide. So hopefully most of this is going to be exposed in a few hours. I think low tide's about 5:30 today.
Yes, maybe around 6ish. It was 5:35 yesterday, I remember.
Oh yeah, it's a bit later.
Yeah.
So it's probably best at this point to actually say who you are, isn't it? Rather than just being this wonderful Welsh voice that is
diolch yn fawr.
much better than mine. Mainly because I'm not Welsh.
It was very nice to hear somebody Welsh pronounce Dwyrid and Glaslyn, because oftentimes it's, I end up hearing English people pronouncing them. Don't know why, but yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to have that Welsh tones coming through. Yeah.
Well, I'm born and bred. My name's Gethin Jones. I'm very much a local lad. Where we're sitting, we can see Meirionydd, the hills in the distance in the haze, and the other side of those hills is Trawsfynydd, which is where my dad came from. My mum came from Criccieth, which is 5 miles down the coast that away. This is kind of my home patch of ground, really. I've been here, there and everywhere throughout my life, but living here for the last 12 years by now, so lovely to be back in my part of the world.
Yeah, this is Snowdonia, or I suppose we should say
Eryri. Absolutely, Eryri by now.
Yeah. How do you feel about the change of name for the national park to the Welsh?
I don't think it's changed. It was always Eryri, wasn't it? No,
it's dropped Snowdonia.
It's officially Eryri now, and it's officially Yr which I think is fantastic. It's not that difficult to pronounce if you try, and it's a good thing. I still hear lots of people calling it Snowdon and Snowdonia. It doesn't drive me crazy or anything, but I think it is a very, very good thing to have Eryri and Yr back, as it is in southern Wales to have Banau Brycheiniog instead of the Brecon Beacons. Not that Brecon Beacons was a terrible name, but Banau Brycheiniog is local. It's indigenous. It's the language of ancient Britain, which I think Tolkien was quite keen on. But anyway, yeah.
Well, this is the thing. It's that this is a unique cultural place. It's genetically unique as well, and it's that when you see people arguing about the names of the places, and you see where are they posting from? Oh, they're from Rochdale or England somewhere, and you think, well, this has got nothing to do with you in terms of that. It's if this is a Welsh names that is decided by Welsh people. But it's like you arguing about changing the name of a village in Norfolk or something.
Yes, I guess so. I've nothing absolute. I'm completely positive in favour of tourism, people coming here to visit and enjoy this wonderful part of the world. My mum, we were lucky enough to live in a seafront house in Criccieth, a big old Victorian rambling thing that I still live in at the moment. And my mum could only buy that house because she let it out in the summertime to holidaymakers from England, 2 flats which people used to book months in advance in comparison to what people do nowadays, just turn up at short notice. and people would come there with their families, and generations would come. So they all came from England. Mum always said, don't have anything against the English, because if it wasn't for the English, we couldn't have bought this house. And if I had to rely on tourists from Wales, then we'd have had about 3 lots of tourists, I think.
Yeah.
And 2 of them were during the Eisteddfod in cricket. So
Well, there's that sort of three-way split as well when you look at the Welsh coast. For North Wales, a lot of the tourists traditionally came from the northwest, and over towards Manchester, and as far down maybe as Stoke, and then south of Stoke, they all went to Mid Wales, they went to Aberystwyth.
That's right. Yeah. You'll hear a lot of Brummie accents in Aberdyfi down the coast over that way. Around here, you'll hear Manchester, Liverpool, Lancashire, Yorkshire sometimes. We did have a family from Hereford come up for years and years and years, from the 60s to the late 80s, I think. They were friends more than clients, I think, for Mum later on. And they used to come twice a year. And they'd be out from 8 a.m. till about 8 p.m. every day. And they could write, I think, several books about North Wales, the amount of exploring they did.
Wow.
Yeah, because that's the thing with some of that cultural history as well, and particularly like landscape history, when you look at the mountain stuff here and the countryside and some of that record keeping, a lot of that was actually done by academics and people who came over from England and made Wales almost their hobby project, didn't they?
Yes, that's right, absolutely. I mean, from Victorian times, it's been a holiday destination. 1863, I think, was the date that Criccieth got the railway. So it turned from a fishing village to a holiday destination, really, even though people would come on a steam train. But, people drive now. But it's been a holiday destination, as has Portuguese, where we're sitting, for donkey's years.
Yeah.
Do you think people came on holiday here partly for fishing and things as well? Like they included that as part of it?
Yes, I think so. I remember back in the 70s, a farm, a mile and a half outside of Criccieth, and there was a chap there who used to come down from Lancashire every summer, and sometimes 3 times in the summer, to fish for sea trout in the river.
Yeah.
And he'd live in a little caravan. And there was about 6 caravans on the one farm. Cefnisa is the name of the farm. There's not one there now. And of course, we know that the number of Suin nowadays is tiny compared to what it was in the 1970s, with what's happening with the population of salmonids in our rivers, unfortunately. But that was quite a thing. And I remember my dad would meet him in the local pub, and fishermen's tales and stuff, and that's what I sort of grew up with. And talking of people coming from England to go fishing here, oddly, we've met just outside of Portuguese, the little harbour there, where the yachts are sitting on the mud. That mud and the smell of it, I had a good sniff of it just before we met. My sort of venturing into wild food, I was thinking about this last night, probably starts from there. My Uncle Jim, who was an East Ender, he was born in Poplar in East London in 1906. I'm going back a bit now, I'm not that old, but he used to live in Trawsfynydd, over the hills there, with my Auntie Hilda. They lived in London, got married in London, I think in the 1920s, lived there throughout the Blitz. I had some incredible stories when I was a kid, listening to them telling me about the Blitz in London. And by the 60s, they'd come to live in Trawsfynydd. Now, Uncle Jim, being an East Ender, loved his seafood. And he used to take me, age of 4 onwards, 4, 5, 6, I remember. We used to go into that little harbour with our wellies and his fork, which I've still got in my shed, and dig for great big lugworms.
Oh, wow.
Which are 8-10 inches long. Dig them up, stick them in a tin or a bucket. And then the evening, when the tide came up, we'd be around the other side on the port, actual dock itself. This is back in the days when the public had access to bits of the old port there before it's all private there now, which is very weird. And we'd sit on that little edge of the dock with my Auntie Hilda with us, fishing quite happily, and we'd catch lots of flounders, a few dabs. On a good day, we'd get a place. But even the flounder were decent sized, good eating. Now, my Uncle Jim, being an East Ender again, when he caught an eel, where most people would chuck that back and go, "Oh, you've got a blinking eel," he'd go, "We've got an eel." Great. That would come home with us. And then I don't think he ever made jellied eels with them, but he did like eating his eel. So Auntie Hilda and I would eat the flounder or the plaice on a good day. And Uncle Jim would tuck into a plaice as well, but he really treasured those eels for eating. So that was when I was like 4 years old. So we did that. He didn't buy bait. We always dug it ourselves.
Yeah.
So it was all our own efforts, really. Whatever we caught, whatever we didn't catch, it was down to us.
What a
So
fantastic memory.
I guess that's a long while ago. That's the 1960s.
Do you think people had a sort of a closer connection between coming to do an activity, or what you might say is sport, so that fishing or something like that, between that and wild food then than now? Because when I go out fishing now, I seem to be sort of in the minority that actually want to catch something and then eat it.
Yes, I very much grew up with that. I mean, I was literally a fisherman. I consider myself a fisherman from 4 years old because my Uncle Jim took me and I had my own rod and everything. But in those days, we never thought of catching fish and putting them back. We'd put them back if they were small. But you caught fish to take them home to eat them. That was the whole purpose of fishing. And everybody I knew had that attitude. I think with the growth many years later of sort of commercial fishing, whether it's trout, whether it's coarse fish, the idea of catch and return sort of grew. But that would have seemed quite bizarre to me at that age, and for many years afterwards. It was, you caught food, you caught fish, people caught rabbits to take home to eat. We used to catch lots and lots of mackerel in Criccieth this time of year, August and September. So when school started again, it's pretty well the height of the mackerel season. Very few around these days, but literally on the beach in front of my house. Even my wife did it with about 20 odd years ago. We caught 100 mackerel between us, literally on the beach one night. We filled 4 fishing bags full of mackerel. We took them home. We ate all we could. The rest went into the freezer.
Wow.
But when we were children, we'd, sort of 9, 10 years old, primary school, we'd go fishing off the Castle Rock in Criccieth, and if we caught a good lot of mackerel, we'd give them to family. We'd eat what we could fresh, which is the best thing in the world, mackerel on the day it's been caught. We'd give them away to our neighbours, who were always grateful for, we give us a mackerel, fantastic. Here's sixpence, or here's a shilling, or whatever. Back in the old days, I am that old, and and if we caught lots, you might even go to a hotel and knock on their door. Do you want to buy some mackerel to give to the chef? And most of the times they take it off you. But nowadays, if you give somebody half a dozen mackerel, they'll look at them and they go, "Oh, did you catch them?" "Yes." "What do we do with them?" And it's like, well, it's food.
Yeah, they like the idea of it, but yeah.
"Oh, they're very lovely. Where do we start? What do we do?" "Well, you take the head off, fillet it, fry it up, bit of pepper, bit of vinegar." "Oh, can you show us how?" And people don't know, which is very odd.
No, it's a sort of weird disconnect that people have, and I've tried to work out when it sort of crept in. Maybe it was supermarkets, maybe it was packaging of food that was more sterile, or it was presented as food, not an animal. And that was one of the things that changed. So when you present somebody with an animal carcass, effectively, which is what a pheasant is, or a rabbit is, or a mackerel, or whatever, people can't look at that and see food. They can look at that and see a dead animal, whereas
Exactly.
fillets on a polystyrene tray or a plastic tray in a supermarket, they see that as an ingredient.
Yeah, sadly, that's the case, and it has been for many years.
Even fishmongers and butchers, though, they've sold fillets or particular cuts of meat and fish and things for a long time, and they possibly, like, the price might have been, you might have got a better price if you were buying a whole fish because there's less work gone into it than if you were buying fillets of fish. But I wonder whether that influenced it as well, whether people wanted the convenience of not having to.
More of it was done in front of people. When you look at old butcher shops and fishmongers,
Exactly.
the butchery was actually done just behind the counter, whereas now it's sort of tucked down the side in a clean room. You don't see a face anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
No.
Absolutely.
No.
And you mentioned rabbits as well. I have a Canadian neighbour. His wife is a local lass. She's from Porthmadog, just up the road. They lived in Canada for a while and then they came back to Wales. If I take them a couple of rabbits, their faces light up and I'm asked in for a drink, whereas anybody else would go, "Oh, poor little bunny."
Yeah.
They are, "Oh, Gethin, thank you so much." and it's all I can do to stop them getting my wife and I round to eat them. Actually, we're eating at theirs tonight, but we're not having rabbit. But what he can do with a rabbit is just unbelievable. He makes schnitzel out of it, and goodness knows what else. It's just, and back in the old days, when I was a youngster, if you give a couple of rabbits to somebody, that could feed a family for a day or two. It's a meal. It's a wild animal, was a wild animal, but hopefully lived a decent life, killed as humanely as possible, treated with respect, but it's food. As soon as it's dead, it's food.
It is, and it's that thing about people say, "Oh, rabbity, it's gamey meat. It doesn't, don't like the smell, don't like the taste." If you're getting that rabbity smell, you're probably not cooking it correctly.
Yeah,
you aren't treating it with sort of the effort that's required.
I think what they're complaining about is that it's not factory farmed, bland meat.
Yeah. Because even the difference between farmyard chicken compared to supermarket
huge.
chicken.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, talking of fresh meat, let's talk about wildfowling.
Okay.
So, what is wildfowling? There's two pigeons just
Two wood pigeons just flown past.
Yeah.
They're not wildfowl though, not in the same
Still
sense.
Edible though.
Still edible.
They're still
very
edible,
much edible.
very tasty wild foods.
Yes.
Talking about there used to be a very good fruit and veg and meat and game and fish shop in the high street in Porthmadog, long since closed, unfortunately. But when I was a youngster, I've gone off at a tangent now, haven't I? When I was literally 17, just passed my test, and when petrol used to be 70p a gallon, now that is going back.
Yeah, that's a while.
That is a while. That is a while. And it was just when I passed my test. I remember when I just started driving, I could borrow my dad's car, and if I shot enough wood pigeon over fields of barley, I could sell them whole to that fishmonger game dealer and make enough to drive up to Carnarvon to buy some good cartridges off the old gun shop up here, Huxley Jones, and buy a gallon of petrol for Dad, so he'd end up with more petrol than in the car than there was when he gave it to me. So it was all win-win. Dad got more petrol, I got more cartridges, and I was ready for some more pigeon. But anyway, yes, wild food. What's wildfowling? We're looking now over a huge estuary, the Dwyrid and the Glaslyn. Fantastic habitat, natural habitat for wildfowl of all sorts of species, and I've known this place for half a century or more now, literally. Again, I say I am that old. I used to come here on the Webb's counts way before I started shooting, once every month, every winter. As I mentioned, we'd walk along the cob, we'd count all these little black dots here, oyster catchers and what have you, that are feeding out there at the moment. We'd walk all the way out in the sands over there to count the shelduck, the widgeon, the mallard, the teal, the geese. Not many geese in those days. There were few Canada geese, much fewer Canada geese than there are now. I remember being out on those sands and having 4 dark-bellied Brent geese fly over us, which we were absolutely amazed at one Sunday afternoon. So wildfowling, what's the definition? It's the pursuit of wild birds, which is wildfowl, mainly duck and geese now, although there's still one wader on the list of shootable birds, which I haven't shot for ages, is the golden plover. But we're mainly talking about several species of duck and about 4, I think it is, species of geese, Canada greylag, pinkfoot, and the white front, but the European white front, isn't it? We get the Greenland white front go down to the Dovey estuary locally here. I've not seen, I think I might have seen them once on this estuary about 10 years ago, when an extremely cold patch and 4 grey geese came up from Harlech direction. Spotted them a long way off. I thought, they're not Canadas, they're too small, they're wrong for greylag. So put the gun down and just watched them, and I'm pretty sure they were white fronts. Probably come up from the Dovey, because it would have frozen over there, or they'd have got snow, because they go quite far up the Dovey estuary where they are down there. So anyway, it's the pursuit of wildfowl, duck and geese, and 1 species of wader below the high water mark, if you want to be purist about wildfowling, as opposed to duck shooting. Whereas you can shoot duck anywhere, you can go inland, put them out of a ditch, or flight them into ponds in the evening. or by lakes, waterworks, etc., wherever you like.
So wildfowling would be always in salty water then?
Yes,
really, because you're going to
salty
be
or
on the
brackish.
coast.
Yes, you're on the coast. It's a coastal activity, basically.
Or is it more that you're dependent on what the wild element of that? You can't do supplementary feeding or breeding. You're not potentially breeding pheasants and releasing them or doing that kind of thing. You are going to a place that is effectively managed by nature, and you're waiting for nature to arrive.
Absolutely. It's this estuary, and estuaries up and down the country, all over Britain and everywhere else. It's a naturally occurring habitat, and there's some things man can do to alter it, but not a lot. And because you're dealing with the sea, the elements, and it's one of the few entirely natural habitats in Britain. You've got this and possibly a few mountain tops in Wales, Scotland for certain, which you could call properly wild habitat, but this is definitely wild habitat. There's nothing you can do much to this as it is. So, and it's the habitat which attracts lots of waders. We can see dozens and dozens of oyster catchers having a feed out there, but also it's attractive for duck, all sorts of species of duck and geese to feed, rest, live in. And obviously in the wintertime we're hosting, as we've seen, that big cloud of waders over there, lots and lots of birds that come from Europe because everywhere's frozen solid there, so they come here to spend the winter and they can survive. So it's entirely wild. There's no release of birds, as you say. They're entirely wild birds that we shoot. It's sustainably done because wildfowling is the oldest shooting sports, and most of the populations of the birds we're targeting are in a healthy condition. There is a few exceptions to that Basque have actually this year been very good in suggesting that we limit our take of certain species, which is a good thing. But there's lots of factors in that. It's not thought that shooting is a significant factor in the decline of any species of wildfowl. There's a lot more things involved, like global warming, the fact that lots more wildfowl are staying on continental Europe throughout the winter, that short stopping, so they're not making it across the sea to the UK to spend the winter time. So that can go some way to explaining changes in populations. And of course, populations fluctuate the whole time. You're looking at certain species will have tens of thousands breeding in the UK, and then tens or hundreds of thousands will come over from Europe in the wintertime. So yeah, it's wild. And then obviously when you're out here, and the best weather for it is the rougher the better. It can get too windy. I have been out in 100-mile-an-hour winds trying to wildfowl, and you can't stand up, literally. And any birds they look for cover and stay there. So that you can get too windy for wildfowling, even though windy conditions, stormy conditions are the best.
No, I was just going to say they're going to be very fast-flying birds if the wind is that strong as well.
Very. You can use the wind to your advantage, and you try your best to position yourself so that where you are, where you use your experience and skill to guess where the bird's going to be flying to and from. Duck and geese will fly more during the evenings and the mornings, and that's the best time to intercept them.
Okay. Geese
roost at night. Quite a few grey lag used to roost out here, actually, on the sands at night, whereas duck do the opposite. Duck rest up and roost during the day and feed at night. So morning and evening, dawn and dusk, you've got geese moving from where they've roosted all night in the morning to where they're going to feed during the day, and duck will do the opposite. They'll move from where they've been feeding all night to where they're going to rest in the day. So you've got a bit of traffic going on. So you predict where they're going to be traveling from and to, and position yourself. I was expecting duck to come up this river now. I'd position myself behind that rock so the duck's flying into the wind. Mallard will cruise at around about 45, 50 miles an hour. So if it's got a 20-mile-an-hour wind blowing in its face, it'll fly quicker, but it'll be slowed down a little bit. Whereas if it's coming with the wind behind it, even if it's just cruising, it'll be doing 45 plus. If it's a 20-mile-an-hour wind, it'll be doing 65, which is pretty quick.
And if you're you've already got to be able to identify the species on the wing, because you've got so many other species out there in the marshes or on that foreshore that aren't quarry. So you've got to be able to spot what you are allowed to shoot and what you're taking that day, and predict the behavior and know the flight patterns and know what it's going to be doing in those conditions and read the conditions. It's a lot of really technical stuff all rolled into one.
It is
thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not standing on a peg with pheasants pouring over your head thinking, what is that? Oh, it's a cock or a hen. You've got to spot something sometimes a couple of 100 yards off and identify it positively as a quarry species, a legal quarry species, before you even think of shooting. Or, in the half light, it's more difficult again. You just get a glimpse of something coming past. So what tells you it's a mallard? What tells you it's a shelduck? Both have very similar silhouettes. Shelduck's a bit bigger than a mallard, but in the half light you can't necessarily spot that. So you've got to listen, and you look and listen, and eventually, and years of bird watching did help, I've got to admit. You get what bird watchers call the jizz of a bird.
Yeah.
I can tell by looking at the shape of that gull sitting there that it's a herring gull. It's an adult herring gull. Just about to see some colour on it. If it was dark, I could see the outline. So you'd have to think, right, it's a gull, but what kind of gull? It's not a black-headed, it's too big. It's not a great blackback, it's too small. It's a herring gull, but I couldn't tell it's an adult at night because I couldn't see it's got a grey, black and a...
It's a bit like identifying the sort of the silhouettes of Russian armour in the military or stuff like that. It's like you have to...
Or World War II fighter aircraft. I was looking at something with Jimmy Edwards, a clip of Jimmy Edwards today, who actually was a Dakota pilot in Arnhem.
Right.
And he said he saw this aircraft flying at him, and on the leading edge of the wings saw twinkling lights, he thought, first of all, and then he thought, no, hang on, that's actually shooting at me. And it flew past the front of his aircraft, and he saw big black crosses on it and said, oh, that's like in the books they gave us. It's a Focke-Wulf 190. So
Wow.
Quite an amazing... Yeah, anyway, so it can be like that. You've got to be able to identify birds by size, silhouette, behaviour, flight patterns, and the sound. Some widgeon going over your head is very different to mallard. Mallard have that, very high-pitched whistle sound, whereas a widgeon is more sort of... And something that goes past your head like a grenade launched out of a grenade launcher. That's a teal. And they can pass their head height. They're amazing birds. So, yeah, the flight patterns and all sorts of things give you a clue. Geese as well. Geese at night, you can tell the greylags from the Canadas and the pinkfoot, obviously, which we do get a few around here. I'm not aware that any have been shot around here for many a year, but they're building up the numbers. That's one of the things as well. That's one of the pluses with wildfowling.
What are you doing?
We're recording a podcast.
Oh, really?
You'll be in it now.
Do you need any Irish influence? Will that make it sound good?
Always welcome.
Always welcome. Which bit are you from?
Go on, guys. We'll let you carry on. Sorry.
Whereabouts are you from?
I'm from a place called Tullamore, County Offaly.
Tullamore.
Yes.
Which side's that?
That's right in the middle. Smack bang in the heart of the...
Is that where they make Tullamore Dew?
Very good.
Yes, it is.
Wow, I love you.
You know what it is?
Go on.
It doesn't stand for morning dew. It stands for Daniel Edward Williams. And he was the eldest son of the owner.
Well, fantastic.
I know. Just lodge that in there because you never know. One day you're in a pub.
It's there. It'll be in a pub quiz.
The winning question.
Fantastic.
Oh, you can put that on your podcast.
That's going in the podcast.
It's in.
Don't forget
You're
to let
famous.
This lovely young Irish girl. Don't forget that bit.
Absolutely.
Lovely young,
Gorgeous young Irish girls. Thank you very
as
much.
pretty as the morning sun there.
Have a good day.
These are the perils
Brilliant.
of recording a podcast in public.
It is, isn't it?
So
That's fantastic.
for people, you've got a place to do it. You've got a foreshore, and you've got what do you need to do it? I mean, shotgun is the only weapon of choice here, presumably.
Yes, you've got to use a shotgun, and since I think 1998, I've been using non-lead shots because it's illegal to shoot wildfowl with lead shot, which is quite right. So I've been using all sorts of things. Tungsten, Bismuth I started off using. The first bismuth load seemed to be appalling. They weren't very good at all. They'd fall to bits, but got much better quite quickly, actually. Tungsten was excellent. Some big tungsten cartridges for geese I remember using here. The last 6 seasons I've been using steel shot, various loads of steel shot. My favourite at the moment is number 3, 32 grams of number 3s for duck. Pretty well all species that'll cover from teal up to widgeon to mallard. And I use 35 grams of number 1s for geese. That's Canada's grey lag, and in the rare occasions that I venture over the border and go as far as the Wash, pink feets.
And for the listeners that aren't sort of au fait with this, the number for the shot size, the smaller the number, the bigger the actual piece of shot.
Yes, that's right. Number 1 shot, I think, is about 4 millimeters across.
It's about garden pea kind of size, isn't it?
Well, not quite that big, but
maybe petit pois.
yeah.
Petit pois.
Petit
Yeah,
pois
petit
size,
pois,
yeah.
yeah.
You need something substantial to hit a goose and to be confident you're going to kill it and bring it down.
But yeah, it's also there are fewer effectively projectiles in that
Yes.
shot as well. So
Yeah.
the bigger the projectile, the fewer there are in the cartridge.
Yes, for a given load, you'll have fewer projectiles, lead shot, steel shot. Steel shot.
Definitely not lead.
Yeah, definitely
No.
not lead, folks. So yeah, it's a balance. It's all shotgun shooting is a compromise, really. The shotgun is essentially a short-range weapon. You've got, I think, with my usual duck load, you've got about 40 yards range that you can kill a duck stone dead, and I wouldn't want to shoot one further than that because you risk wounding it. Similarly with geese, even with a heavy load of steel shot, 30, 35 yards.
I was going to say, what are kind of your engagement ranges for this?
Yeah, that's pretty well it. 40 yards tops for duck, 30, 35 for geese. Beyond that, you'll hit them, but you won't bring them down. You won't kill them, which is not good. We've got to consider the bird's welfare.
Yeah.
Sounds strange from somebody who wants to actually kill the bird to take it home and eat it, but you can't be a wildfowler and not have, or even a bird watcher, and have tremendous admiration for the birds that inhabit this very habitat, because it's lovely on a day like this. You can walk around, if you could wade out there, you could go in your bare feet. Come here in the winter time, it might be sub-zero, or it might be a big old gale blowing in from the sea. They're here the whole time. This is where they live. And they're just amazingly tough to be able to survive in a place like this. We get out of bed at silly times of the morning and come here in the cold and the wet and the wind, but we go home for a cup of coffee and a fire at the end of the day, and they don't. They stay here. So they're tremendous, and they've travelled. So there's local mallard around here now. The geese are fairly local. They breed up in the hills, the Canadas. But the widgeon will have travelled hundreds, thousands of miles to get here. So it's they're fantastic birds.
I was talking to somebody about this. Where were the game fair? I'm not allowed to say who it was for that. Okay. I was at the game fair talking to an anonymous person, but we were saying that you can almost judge someone's shooting style and what their opinions are on many things by how much the landscape they're shooting in matters to them. How much is it I'm going to this place because that place is special versus how am I going to this place because it's really prestigious. Is it the landscape itself, or is it what people will think when they find out you've been there? They're two different levels.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Would you go there and not tell anyone about it and get as much enjoyment from it versus it only matters if I can tell someone about it that I've been there?
Yes, I see what you're getting at. It's, to me, I mean, this landscape is home, and all the names of the hills and everything mean stuff to me. There's the hills up there, Moelwyn Mawr and Moelwyn Bach. Moel is bald, as in no hair. Wyn is from Gwyn, which is white. So the names of those mountains, however old and ancient they are, means the bald white place at the top, which means there wouldn't have been any trees on the top. Despite what George Monbiot and others might claim, there would have been trees up to about 2,000 feet, but they're above. The summits are above 2,000 feet, so they would have been a bald, empty place. And in the winter, as I know very well when I remember my chemistry class, because the blackboard was there and the window was there, and there were the Moyle Winds covered in snow, and that's where I used to stare at for hours on end. And then I'd be asked a question about chemistry, and I go, H2O, sir. No, that was Form 1, Gethin. Oh, right, sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, the landscape here is a living landscape. It's a living thing. Where I go on the Menai Strait is in the footsteps, almost in the mud, or the wake, because he did lots of his shooting afloat, was of Ralph Payne Galway, who used to go punt gunning in that part of the world. As far as he'd go on Ireland, Anglesey as well. So yeah, it's there's 150 years of history of wildfowling in places I go, and probably more than that.
There are clubs attached to wildfowling, aren't there? That's generally your route of access for getting onto that piece of land legally to shoot, is via a club.
Yeah, absolutely. In years gone by, and many years ago, when I first started shooting, obviously there were clubs in existence at those times, but the places I go wildfowling now are controlled by clubs. But in those days, it was, I don't like the term free for all, because it sounds like, you'd go there and shoot anything you want, which was certainly not the case. But it was possible to go wildfowling without being a club member. You could go, as long as you were on the foreshore, you would be okay. Obviously, we wouldn't go shooting anywhere near people or anybody fishing or any farms or anything. You'd be far away from anybody, as you are when you do it these days. Yes, so you didn't have to be a club member. It didn't really police itself, but it was kind of, wildfowling was a form of shooting quite often in the older days, where people would take up, because they couldn't do any other shooting, they couldn't get permission to go shooting inland on somebody's ground, and they go, I'll be a wildfowler. Now, some mad people like myself stuck to it and still doing it half a century later, whereas others did it for a season or two and went, hang on, I got freezing cold, I saw some black dots in the distance, and I didn't bring anything home to eat, so where can I sign up to go pheasant
shooting?
Can
I improve any one of those? Yeah.
So yeah, and my wife is still convinced that I need locking up, because I'm a little bit potty for getting out of bed when it's blowing an absolute force 9 gale outside in the middle of winter. But
she doesn't complain when you bring back duck and geese.
We're having goose lobscouse with dumplings tomorrow eevening, which she absolutely loves, and so do I, and so do my daughters. So yeah, she's starting to see the light after 26 years. But yeah, it's not a sport for everybody, and and if it was, God, we'd have hundreds of people shooting here, and they'd scare all the wildfowl away. So it's a minority sport. I think always has been. It's a very tough sport, and you've got lots of walking home over miles and miles of places like this with nothing in your game bag. And most sane people go, why does anybody do this? No, not really. It's a mindset. You've got to be of the mindset that I'm going into a wild habitat and I'm targeting wild quarry. And if I'm really lucky, I'll come home with something I can eat. And it's fantastic eating. But don't expect to do it every time. It's not guaranteed. There's no team of beaters.
No.
It's all your own work, and the dog, of course. You need a dog in a place like this.
So what are the clubs like? I mean, what are the membership fees like in terms of pricing? And is there a waiting list, or is there?
They vary from
size?
club to club, up and down the country. We're a small club here. We've got 30 odd members at the moment. We can have more. We've got a limit of 60, I think. We used to be around 40 members, but there are fewer people coming into wildfowling these days. We're getting to be almost an old man's sport. There's a few youngsters coming into it, which is great to see. My daughter's very keen. She loves wildfowling. And she's 24, thank goodness. So she's going to join the club here, I think, this season, all being well.
That's fantastic.
She loves it. Even without a gun, she'll come and sit with me for hours on end and get frozen solids, and loves it all. And it's fantastic with a bird ID. girls listen, don't they? Because us boys, we
Yeah.
know everything. But
Oh yeah.
you say something to girls, and then they'll repeat it back to you word for word 2 weeks later, and you go, "Hang on, where'd you get that from? You told me, Dad. All right, okay." Anyway,
Yeah, we've long forgotten it, and we've decided
Yeah.
something else is true since.
yeah,
Yeah.
But it's not a sport for all, but the joys of it are just indescribable. To get up in the middle of the night, spend 3 hours in a channel here, by some measure of luck, judgment, and goodness knows what else, come home with a nice brace of mallards in your bag and know that's going to be a lovely meal come Sunday, is just irreplaceable, and it's all your own work. Well, with the dog as well, doing his retrieving.
And you don't have to be necessarily a local to come and join. People are members of clubs on the other side of the country, aren't
Yes,
they?
absolutely. Some have local restrictions. We used to have a local restriction here, but we can take members from outside of Gwynedd now, outside of the county. So that's fine. And we do welcome wildfowlers to come here. Obviously, there's a big health and safety thing involved in wildfowling because you're venturing below high water mark. So we accompany new members a certain number of times until we're happy and they're happy that they are safe in where they go. They know the escape routes to get off.
Yeah.
When the tide's coming up, and you have got to move at certain points in time very quickly. And that their bird ID is bang on as well, because as we discussed earlier, you've got to be able to tell what's a quarry species and what isn't. You've got to be able to positively identify a quarry species before pulling the trigger.
I was going to ask about that, whether there's entry requirements like any sort of test, or you have to go out with somebody a certain number of times to prove that you that you are ethical in the way that you shoot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that you know what you're looking at, because it
Yes.
would be very simple to say, yeah, I've done it for years, I've got all the knowledge, and saunter out there. But
Yeah,
obviously
that's true.
not good.
The club I rejoined in Carnarvon, I'd been living away for many years, and I found out they were taking on new members when I moved back to Wales. And despite the fact that I'd been, a member of that club, I think they said we had you on the books 22 years ago, Gethin. I still had to go through a formal interview with the committee. And I knew every one of them sat around the table. It was lovely to see them again. But as soon as, after the smiles and we all sat down, it got very serious. And they said, right, we've got some ID questions for you here. Part of which was some photos of wildfowl, some of which were not quarry species, some of which were. And they said, right, tell us what you see here, and, which one would you consider picking up a gun at? And so you had to identify, I think there were mallards, widgeon, pintail. I do remember there was one photo of Brent geese, which do frequent that area in the wintertime. Actually, they'll be there now, which are not quarry. Haven't been since 1954. And I remember looking at the photo and going, that's a dark-bellied Brent goose and that's a light-bellied Brent goose. And they're not quarry, so I wouldn't pick up a gun either of those. They went, you got an extra point there, Gethin, because nobody's spotted. They were dark and light-bellied before. Different subspecies. So bit showy, offy, birdwatchy. But I spotted that. But anyway, you have to do that. And similarly, when we take people out here, we make absolutely certain. We'll sit right next to them and we'll go, what are those? And if it's a bunch of widgeon, quite obviously, and they'll go duck. Which species of duck are they? Quarry species. What's that sitting on the water over there? That's merganser. What would you do with that? Don't shoot it. It's not quarry. So we'd make absolutely certain they're crystal clear.
Yeah.
And we can test. It's quite easily done because it's in the field. It's live. We can test their ID. And as I mentioned, the health and safety bit, get them off in good time, because when the tide comes up here and you're stuck on one of them banks, the lifeboat has turned up a few times, even with locals here have misjudged the tides, which I won't name them. You know who you are if you're listening.
That is shame enough.
I've been soaked many, many a time. Looking at that little point over there, I floated off there one morning in my neoprene boots. I had about 10 yards to go to the bank through a channel about this wide, and got within 10 yards of it and then couldn't feel the sand underneath my rubber-soled feet anymore.
Oh,
And then floated. Thank goodness it wasn't windy, and I managed to do a little bit of a backstroke, get back to shore.
yeah.
My Labrador looks at me strangely when that happens, because he's
sure.
swimming in circles around me going, "What you doing, Dad?" But no, it happens very rarely, but it does happen. No matter how experienced you are,
Well,
it can change tremendously.
just that little bit of extra rainfall or the wind
The
coming,
wind,
changing direction makes a big difference
Very
here,
good pal
doesn't
of
it?
mine was caught out on a little island here. He'd been wildfowling one day. The tide came up, high tide. There was an island of sand with lots of duck and geese on it, and he thought, "Oh, if I'd have stayed there, I would have got some great shooting." He thought, "Well, I didn't get a shot today. I haven't scared anything off. I'll try it in 24 hours when the tide comes up again." Unbeknownst to him, the wind had gone from what it is now an easterly to a southwesterly, which meant that the tide came up a heck of a lot quicker and a heck of a lot higher when it did come up. So
Yeah.
he was looking at 50, 100 square meters of dry sand about 2 foot above the water on one day. The next day it came up to his feet, his knees, his waist, his chest, his neck, and he thought, once he was up there, and he said he'd had some good shooting. He had a couple of geese and a few duck floating in the water on bits of string around him. Didn't have a dog with him. And when the water was lapping his chin, he thought, if it comes up any higher, I'm going to have to chuck the gun, somehow try and get my waders off, swim 1/4 mile back to shore, and then come back for the gun at low tide. And he said it was there what felt like forever, and eventually felt the water level going down.
Oh,
He was stuck there another couple of hours, but anyway, got off the foreshore, in the car, home, straight into a hot bath, stayed there, thanking his lucky stars. By 10 p.m, he's watching the news on the TV. His mum goes, "Would you like a cup of tea?" Takes the cup, but he's shaking.
oh no.
And she's going, "What's wrong with you?" "I don't know." "You've got the shakes?" "Yes." Mum got worried, called the ambulance. They took him to hospital, and the doctor said, "You've got hypothermia, mate."
Yeah.
Despite
Yep.
taking that hot bath,
Yeah.
you were that close.
Possibly the hot bath actually made it
So-
worse.
He said, yeah, apparently that's not the best thing to do. I don't know what the best thing to do would be, but apparently it wasn't a good thing.
Oh,
taking the
I've
hot
got my
bath.
boring my other business head on it. So it's effectively hypovolemic shock that's happening. So when you've been very cold for a long time, all the blood that's in your extremities starts to get reabsorbed into your body because it's trying to keep it in the core. There's not enough room in there.
Yeah.
So you've got, your core is full of blood and trying to stay warm, but your extremities haven't got as much in them. When you get quickly rewarmed, when you've been at that stage for a long time, your body goes, "Oh right, everything's fine again," opens up the valves to your arms and your legs,
Yeah.
and the blood that was only filling your core and your torso is now trying to spread itself across your arms and your legs, and it's like you've bled out slightly. It's like you've got very low blood volume.
Yep.
So that's why people get rescued, and they been floating around in the sea after the trawler sinks for 6 hours and get pulled into the helicopter, and they were absolutely fine vertically, and then they get put horizontally or put into a warm another vessel or something and get warmed up, and then they suddenly die because it's effectively like they've lost half of their blood.
Yes.
And you've got all these toxins that sit in the muscles as well, and there's all these other processes. Rewarming somebody from hypothermia, you've got to be really, really careful about. There's a point where you have to go to passive rewarming. So there's all these protocols in hospital about, basically they warm your blood, they pass it through a machine and warm your blood back up.
Wow.
And add plasma.
Wow.
And they put warm air into your lungs, actually just above your average core temperature, and
Yep.
just raise it slightly. It's a really fascinating thing, but it's not something we really think about in the outdoors as
Yeah.
much. This
Yep.
just being cold will kill you. Being colder than getting warm again will kill you. So what do we do?
I had a good pal who used to take me wildfowling in my first few years going, and we'd watch the news, the North Wales Christmas New Year time. Oh, there's a climber died of exposure on Trevan tonight. And sometimes we'd sit by the river in minus temperatures, and he'd go, "Hey, Gethin, what's stopping us dying from exposure right now? Because it's just about as flipping cold here as it is on top of one of the mountains." And I go,
Basically nothing.
Not quite sure.
Yeah.
No.
Not quite sure. So, yeah, it can be tough. You've got to be very, very careful doing it. It demands some degree of fitness. I'm not the fittest person in the world, but there's a lot of walking, but there's a lot of wading and stuff. at night in pitch black. You've got to be careful. But that's part of the attraction, really.
So we've said before on the podcast, I know we've talked about this, you and I, Gethin, at different times, about there's this weird sort of split in the potential audience for wild food and for shooting in the UK. You've got people who had access to it from an early age or throughout their life easily, and they grew up doing it, and it's what they're in socially. And then you've got a whole other set of people who are very interested in it, but they've been outside of it, and they're more likely to be watching American media or consume like Meat Eater or something like that. And one of those shows or podcasts and other things like that they're the ones that come and ask us on our courses about where they can bow hunt for elk in the UK and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We were talking about this with Abby a couple of episodes ago,
yes.
with access to access to shooting opportunity and things. And she's Welsh. English Welsh.
She's Welsh. She's half Welsh,
yes.
half Cornish.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Comes from that, but she looks at it more from the American point of view because her wife is American.
Yeah, and she spent time over there.
Wildfowling is possibly closer to the American model of shooting, maybe, which is that North American model of wildlife conservation, where you have, effectively, you create good habitat, you manage it well, and then you have surplus, as it's put in American parlance, to harvest.
Yep.
And but you have to exercise a lot of fieldcraft and skill to be able to do it, and you have licenses to go through, and they have all their processing. Wildfowling, I mean, as an outsider, I've never been wildfowling, but I've spoken to you a lot about it and other people. It seems that's closer almost to that American model than anything else in the UK.
Yeah, I think so. You're in, first of all, a very, very natural habitat, which you've got lots of in the States. Arguably, you've not got that in the UK. As I mentioned earlier, you've got estuaries and maybe mountain tops, but everything in between is managed by man to some extent or another.
For thousands of years, not just a few hundred.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Here, you're really in the natural elements, and you're at the mercy of the elements, and so are the birds that you're after, the quarry that you're pursuing. And the conditions can decide absolutely everything, where you get any shooting or not. And I mean, I would, before I went to live away, I'd mad keen wildfowl, and I'd go out sometimes 3 weeks without getting a shot at anything, or not without bringing anything home, definitely.
Yeah.
And if you tell somebody who's used to shooting, 3 figures of pheasants between a team of guns on their day shooting, that you can come home with nothing, you do get a second take off them. Sort of, why would you do that, and how does that work? Yeah. And it's just that you're dependent on wild birds, reading the conditions, predicting, using your experience, skill. There's a lot of guesswork involved, there's a lot of luck involved, but where you're going to be in any of this 2,000 odd acres, where you're going to position yourself so that you will have quarry come within range of you. And I'm talking 35, 40 yards range, tops. Which is very close.
Yeah, well, you think, well, the hills over there are, 1,500 metres away, 2 kilometres away?
Yep. So there's a lot of guesswork. You do learn by experience, but every day's a school day when you're wildfowling. Sort of, it dictates that you think, well, if it's not blowing a gale, I'm not going to go. Well, I've sometimes got up on a Saturday morning expecting a gale, and it hasn't turned up. The weatherman's got it wrong, or I've got it wrong. And I've been sitting out here in the pot calm thinking, I'm not going to shoot a thing. And I've come home with a couple of geese and been very, very happy with that. Thinking, how did that happen? They shouldn't have been moving. Yeah. And other times you come when it's a howling gale and you're thinking, right, did I bring enough cartridges? Because boy, am I going to get some shooting today. And you don't even see a bird. And that's wildfowling. Some people would be just put off by that. But I don't know. I'm just drawn back because you're learning the whole time. And I've been doing it for 46 years now.
Yeah. Would you say as well that with wildfowling, it seems as though, from my outside perspective, that it's a lot more shooting for food? If you're wildfowling, you are most likely taking it home and eating it.
Yes, you are taking it home. You're eating it yourself, or your family's eating it as well. You'll give some to your neighbours. That's what I do. My Canadian neighbour in particular loves a brace of mallards. He'll eat widgeon. He showed me how to properly butcher a Canada goose to get all the meat off not just the breast, but the legs. And he also takes meat off the neck now and again as well.
Oh, wow.
there's a lot of meat. There's an awful lot of meat in a
Yeah.
Canada goose, and it's delicious. I need to learn properly how to do the legs at a low temperature for 11 hours, which I was thinking there's a pal of mine knows how to do that. My neighbour does that as well. So there's a lot of culinary skills to brush up on. It's not like cooking farm chicken.
No.
It's a long way from that, but the result on the table at the end of the day is just gorgeous. I mean, I do a pretty basic lobscouse with Canada goose, but I remember the first time I tried it on my elder daughter. She took a taste test, and what do you think of that? Oh, where did you get this beef, Dad? And I said, who said anything
Blimey.
about beef?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
What noise did this animal make when it was alive?
It went Hong Kong cannot moo moos, and there's lots and lots of meat on them, and it is prepared properly. It's absolutely delicious. People are sometimes put off, particularly wild goose, because if you get an old gander, and if you cook it wrong, if you basically if you let the meat dry out as you cook it, it's going to go as hard as leather. And people will say, "Oh, I tried a goose once years ago, and it was like eating a brick." Well, it would be if you didn't keep the meat moist, and that's the secret. It's not a farmyard goose. It hasn't got all that fat on it. You've got to keep the meat moist, whatever recipe you're using. But if you do that right, it is
I can imagine.
succulent. It's fantastic eating.
Yeah.
So we've got to wrap this up fairly quickly, only because we've got a foraging course sort of running on this beach that was sat 10 foot above,
Just above, yeah.
in about half an hour or so. So we're going to go off and run that. So let's finish off with, if somebody is interested in taking up wildfowling, they're listening to this, they're in the UK, they either already have a shotgun certificate or they are able to get one, and there's nothing that prevents them doing it. It's just a paperwork exercise now. Where would you send them first? Where's the one place they should go next if they're interested in it?
I think their first point of contact should be Basque. Basque run a very good scheme. There's a little booklet even, and it's all available online as everything else is these days, about the permit scheme up and down the country. So wherever you live in Britain, you're going to be within 50 miles of the coast, aren't you? So get in touch with Basque. They will point you towards your nearest wildfowling club who are members of the permit scheme. We're members of the permit scheme here. And it's possible for a whole £15 to buy a 24-hour ticket to come wildfowling here. And we don't just go, right, there's your foreshore, off you go. We accompany them, the members, one of the members,
Excellent.
myself possibly, will accompany somebody out on the foreshore to make sure they're safe, to make sure they can ID the quarry correctly, and they can give it a whirl. It's not a sport for everybody, so some people will do it and go, I'm glad I've done it, but I don't want to do that again because it was freezing. And other people will go, I'm bitten, I will do this for the rest of my life. So come along, give it a whirl. It's an incredible sport. I can't promise you'll go home with a duck or a goose, but if you do, it will be all your own work. You won't have relied on a team of beaters to scare it out of a wood. It'll be all your own work, and it's absolutely delicious food, great exercise, and what more can I say about? Nobody can see the countryside we're looking at and the estuary we're looking at on this, but what better place would you want to spend
this is
few
one of the
hours?
finest places on
It
earth.
is
This wet,
beautiful.
I love this view here. We come here about once every 2 months, and I never want to go home. But
No.
this is a good spot, and thank you for coming down to come and share a tiny little bit of your knowledge and basically your experience with this with us as well. Will you come back and can we do another one in next year maybe?
Anytime you like.
Talk about something else.
Christ, so, Richard,
Fantastic.
absolutely anytime. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Can people get hold of you anywhere? On Instagram or social media?
Probably Twitter is the best one to get hold of me. Gethin Jones 123 on Twitter. So look me up. I'm the funny-looking chap in the fur hat, but that's another story.
It must say, from my experience, you have to put the whole username in to find you. I don't think Twitter likes you, because when you come up to search Gethin Jones, if you get to search Gethin Jones 12, you don't come up. But when you get to 123, it does.
Okay, all right.
That's you've annoyed the Twitter gods, I think.
I'll have to have a word with Elmo.
Yeah,
You will, won't you?
Elmo Lusk.
Oh, we haven't even called it X yet, have we?
No, the platform formerly known as. Right.
We will put a link in the show notes as well.
Yeah,
for
all
your
this will be in the
Twitter
notes.
account.
Fabulous.
Go into there and they'll go straight to you. If you're interested in our social media, it's at Wild Food People on pretty much every platform. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Gram thing. We have our website, wildfoodpeople.co.uk. There's our courses. We've got some species guides on there. We are launching our 2025 course dates soon, which means you can buy those, and you can buy gift vouchers for somebody for next year, so they can choose their own date of the advertised dates next year, but they can have that as a Christmas present, and there's a printed voucher and things. Plug. We've got our Patreon, and if you want to support us there and get extra stuff, there's all of that. All of it's in the show notes for this episode, and I'm rushing because I'm aware of the time. And all I have to say next is that the Wild Food People podcast was recorded live, overlooking the estuary of the Glaslyn and the Durid.
Yes.
Okay. See, this is the thing with Welsh. It's how much of it is just saying it with a Welsh accent.
Well, you've got to roll your R's as well, as they used to tell me when I learnt Russian.
True.
Yeah.
Durid, Glaslyn and Durid.
Where's the R in Durid?
Durid.
See, halfway
It's in the middle.
At the end.
It's halfway down.
Durid.
Yeah.
Durid actually means two fords. See, it all means something, the names around here.
That is the thing. The Welsh names are almost, they sound wonderful and poetic, and they are so pragmatic.
Glaslyn is the Blue Lake, the river of the Blue Lake, and that's the river of the two fords.
So the river of the Blue Lake and the river of the two fords.
Yeah.
And the Blue Lake's on Snowdon, isn't it? That one.
Yes.
Yeah. That's, or Iridda.
Erwyddfa.
Erwyddfa. Well done.
With
Well done. We are getting there.
Yeah. I've only lived here for 15 years. It's fine.
That's okay.
It is a rural and outdoor production.